Good evening, parents, carers and community members. Thank you so much for joining our webinar this evening, which is focused on the human thread weaving culture into parenthood. Before I introduce our fantastic speaker this evening that some of you may recognise, I just want to say we're not expecting any technical difficulties, but if we do encounter any, please do bear with us. I wanted to signpost our final two webinars of the Michaelmas 1 half term. I'm not sure where the time has gone, but we've got one this Thursday as well, double whammy this week, and that's going to focus off the value of meaningful experiences of the workplace. That's going to be led by Head of Futures, Mrs. Sandeep Charlton. And then we've also got one next week, which is on the 16th of October, and that's going to be led by Jamie Coop, who is going to focus on empowering young minds, specifically breaking stigma around men's mental health. He's actually going to be speaking to our Year 10 pupils this week. So again, fantastic opportunities to join us over the next 2 weeks for our remaining webinars for the Michaelmas 1 series. So without further ado, I'm just going to highlight about our speaker this evening. Hopefully some of you have watched episode 1, which Hawa Khan led last academic year for us. And that was all focused on breaking bias. And that's going to link really seamlessly into this evening's webinar, but you don't have to have watched that. So do not worry, you can go back and watch episode 1 in our YouTube channel following this if you wish. And then we're going to invite Hawa back at the start of the new academic year, and she's going to lead in another one. It's going to be a really nice flow of these themes and topics. So as a reminder, Hawa Khan is a dedicated educator and creative professional with over 20 years of experience in education, training and the arts. She does it all. Since 2005, she has developed innovative teaching methods rooted in empathy, opportunity and growth, using creative expression to enhance learning and well-being for children, young people and adults. Hawa specialises in well-being, relationships and life skills. She's worked with schools, communities, youth charities to help young people develop confidence and essential life skills. She also provides training in leadership, communication and inclusion to educators and professionals. And she really prides herself on fostering meaningful change within work and learning environments. She's also been in this week to deliver some assemblies for our pupils. She is passionate about community and nurturing personal growth, and she inspires not just Forest, but creativity in all those that she works with. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome back Hawa. She's a firm favourite of the Forest community, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, Natasha, I need that crystallized so I can hear it every morning. It really is, and such a mouthful. And so thank you so much. Pleasure to be here this evening. So the human thread. For the most part, we always say, we all bleed blood, it's all red, we all, we come from the same place. But fundamentally, the human thread that binds us is that all human beings on a basic level want to be seen, heard, and understood. We live in a multicultural society, uber diverse. And so within our homes, we have our own cultures, and our children also come with their own cultures too. So we're looking at tonight weaving parenting with culture and with other cultures so we can create a wider, bigger, greater village. Because after all, it takes a village to raise a child. And so therefore we are the village. What if understanding difference is the key to raising a compassionate child? So in tonight's webinar, you can look forward to a few stories from me, as always, a follow-on from our breaking bias. So we will be looking at how our unconscious mind, how our habits, how our conditioning, our training, the things that we pick up along the way, how we weave that into our parenting and our caring for our children and young people. So we will explore how cultural sensitivity influences the emotional intelligence of children, examining and embracing difference enriches inclusion. Some simple tools and reflection, and a few that you can do during this talk. And considering a few life scenarios, a few that may be familiar, but just a few for you to ponder so that we can shift any assumptions and we can dig a little deeper into that empathy. Excuse me. Committing to a small change so that we can weave more openness, respect, unity, understanding into our world family. Today is going to be one of insight and action. And as I said, a few stories from me. There's a few videos here for us to watch, but where we are able to see how our own behaviors and values, how they create the thread that our children learn from. As always, my webinars, my talks are brought to you in solidarity. No shame, no blame, no finger pointing. As I said, we are building our village, and within that village, we are all trying. And so this is in support of all of us and a reminder that we can always be growing, blossoming, and blooming. So we all have our things. Whether those things are passed down to us, some things that we observed and learned, and other things that we just learned because they were habits or rituals in our household. I'll tell you a really quick story before the video. So in our house, shoes were a thing. Shoes were to be taken off at the front door. And for those of you who may have come from households where there was plastic running through the hallway and up the stairs, we had that house. And so you were able to wear shoes downstairs. And after a while, that was taken away and it was shoes at the door. So everybody knew when they came to our house, shoes at the door. Also, something that was quite culturally significant, a real training that I realized later on in life, is the turning of shoes. So if shoes were turned with the bottom of the foot upwards, the flat side upwards, we would always have to turn them over. So going to friends' houses, I'd be turning shoes over and people would be asking me and I'd say, you know, that's just our culture. That's just our culture. And so interestingly enough, not realizing how even more ingrained that was in my the fabric of my being, I suppose, is that I was on the train, and anybody who's been on London Underground train knows that the seating is quite narrow. So the gentleman sits, puts his foot up, and the foot side is facing towards me. I take a breath, I toil for a bit, have a few mental conversations. Why is it bothering me? It shouldn't bother me. It doesn't mean anything by it. But it was bothering me. And in the time that I was doing that, I was forming biases in my mind because I'm feeling uncomfortable. I took a breath very kindly, turned towards him and said, would you mind putting your foot down? Very quickly, he put his foot down, he apologized, and he was getting off the next stop. So I didn't even have a chance to, to even thank him. The same day, but later that day, I get on the train and there again, somebody puts their foot up. This time I decided not to seethe. I decided that I would actually say something and, and maybe a conversation will happen. So I asked him to put his foot down. He said, yes, so sorry. And then turned and said, can I ask you why, what the reason is? And I began to talk to him about, cultural etiquettes and shoes and feet. I have a friend who's Japanese, and we recently also had that conversation because when you go to her house, it's slippers. If you don't have socks, it's socks and slippers. They meet you at the door, and that's her practice, that's her culture. And so we ended up having this really rich conversation about culture and the things that we had in common and then other things that we didn't. And I left learning something, and so did he. So I say that to say we all have our things, and just by way of having a conversation, we might be able to understand each other better, and therefore that difference becomes a learning of value. So which cultural story or value is central to you? Which part of another culture is invisible or foreign to you? Having a think about that. Okay. And in this moment, having that thought, but taking that thought with you and just noticing when that default culture thing comes up in your daily habits and in your responses, because I definitely know I have a lot of my mum's responses. Okay, we're going to watch our first video, which is explaining unconscious parenting.
Have you ever stopped to wonder, are you raising your child, or is your child raising you? Parenting is often seen as a one-way street where we teach, discipline, and guide. But what if parenting is just as much about transforming ourselves as it is about shaping our children? Welcome to today's episode, where we dive deep into conscious parenting, an approach that is not about controlling children, but about understanding and guiding them through self-awareness and connection. Dr. Shefali Sabari, a clinical psychologist and the author of The Conscious Parent, argues that parenting is not about molding a child into who we think they should be, but about allowing them to be who they are meant to be. And to do that, we as parents must first heal, grow, and evolve. Section 1. What is conscious parenting? Conscious parenting is not about perfection. It is about being present, aware, and responsive instead of reactive. Instead of viewing children as blank slates that need to be filled with our knowledge and expectations, this approach sees them as individuals with their own wisdom, emotions, and paths to follow. The philosophy behind conscious parenting stems from a blend of psychology, mindfulness, and emotional intelligence. Studies have shown that authoritative parenting, which combines warmth with boundaries, fosters higher emotional intelligence and resilience in children. Baumrind, 1991. Conscious parenting takes this further by emphasizing self-awareness in parents, because our unresolved emotional wounds often dictate how we react to our kids. The impact of unconscious parenting. Many parents unknowingly project their fears, anxieties, and unfulfilled dreams onto their children. For example, if a parent was constantly criticized as a child, they might become overly critical of their own children, thinking they are helping, but actually passing down generational patterns of self-doubt and insecurity. Research shows that children raised by emotionally aware parents develop greater self-confidence, better social skills, and a stronger sense of purpose. Siegel and Hartzell, 2003. On the other hand, children who grow up in environments where emotions are dismissed or controlled rather than understood often struggle with emotional regulation later in life. Section 3. Principles of conscious parenting. 1. Self-reflection before correction. Instead of reacting to a child's behavior with punishment, ask yourself, why does this behavior trigger me? Could it be that my child's defiance is reminding me of my own struggles with authority? Before correcting your child, correct your perception. 2. Connection over control. Instead of seeing misbehavior as defiance, view it as communication. If a child is acting out, ask yourself, what need is not being met? A child throwing tantrums is not trying to manipulate you. They are trying to express something they can't put into words. 3. Model the behavior you want to see. Children learn by watching. If you want a child who is kind, be kind. If you want a child who is disciplined, show discipline in your daily habits. Neuroscientists confirm that children's mirror neurons make them absorb behaviors from their environment. Goleman, 2006. 4. Create a safe emotional space. Allow your child to express all emotions, joy, sadness, frustration, without shutting them down. Instead of saying, stop crying, try, I see you're really upset. Want to talk about it? This builds emotional intelligence and trust. 5. Let go of ego-based parenting. Conscious parenting is not about proving you are in control or that your child is well-behaved by societal standards. It is about raising a child who is authentic, emotionally aware, and resilient. Section 4. Practical strategies to start today. 1. Practice mindful listening. Put away your phone, make eye contact, and truly listen when your child speaks. This small habit strengthens connection and emotional security. 2. Pause before reacting. When your child misbehaves, take a deep breath before responding. This prevents reactive parenting and helps you approach situations with wisdom rather than frustration. 3. Encourage emotional expression. Instead of saying, "You're okay, stop crying," try, "I see you're upset. What happened?" This teaches emotional literacy. 4. Apologize when necessary. Parents make mistakes. When you overreact, acknowledge it. Say, "I shouldn't have yelled. I was frustrated, but that's not your fault." This models accountability and humility. 5. Spend unstructured time together. Beyond structured activities, let your child lead playtime. This enhances their creativity, decision-making skills, and sense of autonomy. Parenting is not about fixing our children, it is about elevating ourselves. As we heal our own wounds, break our own unhealthy patterns, and approach parenting with mindfulness, we don't just raise children, we raise conscious, empowered individuals who will shape the future. If today's
Thank you. Two things. The first one being, I think parenting might be the hardest job on the planet. In fact, I'm sure that people are nodding, and I know for a fact that to be true. It is the hardest job. And so even with all of that and with all of the everyday effort that it takes, that when we think about having the conscious awareness, sometimes even for ourselves, we're just moving through. But just those small notes and those nuggets of, okay, let me take a breath and pause in this moment, which I'm sure that most parents are doing. And the reason being, in my observation, is that because for a lot of parents, particularly parents of a certain age or from a certain era, let's call it an era, is that there was no negotiation when I was growing up. It was a do as you're told type thing. It was a moving through. And I often have this conversation with parent friends about how we are now navigating, unlearning to parent. So by no means at all is parenting the easiest or a walk in the park, not at all. And simply even because we don't know who's here, who's coming, as was said there, that there is this, I have to meet you where you are. So taking a few notes there and a few nuggets of things that maybe you can just add or at least observe. Okay, so we are going to have another video, and this is with regards to emotional intelligence. IQ is supremely important, and so is EQ, as we know, not for just others, not in terms of how we relate with empathy to others, but how we relate to ourselves. Let's have.
In 1985, I started studying how relationships affect kids and how kids affect relationships. And trying to see how that whole system works together. And it turns out, then, one of the things I'll try to convince you of tonight is that it's all of the same fabric. I mean, the way you relate to one another, the way you relate to your kids, the way your kids relate to you, the way your kids relate to other kids, it's all like it's made of the same quilt. And if you're working on one, then you're actually working on all of it together. Now, if you think about kids and you want to predict how a kid is going to turn out as an adult, maybe you've got a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, and you're curious about, or a kid in school, and you want to know, what information should I collect to find out how this kid's going to be when the kid grows up? The interesting thing is it's not IQ, it's not achievement test, it's not even SAT scores or graduate record exam scores that will predict how the kid will turn out. It's actually how the kid gets along with other children. You know, what this kid is like socially. And what this kid is like socially is going to depend a lot on how you relate to your kid and how you treat your kid. So we'll talk about that. Now, I also started off in the very beginning when I was a professor, beginning professor, curious about how kids make friends. And I just kind of assumed that psychologists would know that. And it turned out they didn't know that. And we had to actually observe and see how kids make friends and what they're like with their best friends. And we studied that from age 3 all the way through college and adulthood about friendship, because best friendship and how kids make friends and how we treat friends is a very important part of our family life and our community life. And so we're interested in how all of these systems work together, all these social systems work together. And you've heard about emotional intelligence, and I'm going to be talking to you about some of that tonight. Initially, I was also interested in studying kids and marriages because I was curious about whether there was anything that parents could do if they weren't getting along, right, with one another, and they were fighting with one another, to buffer their kids from the conflict. Now, we found that we could actually measure how parents were getting along in 2 ways. We could either ask them how happy they were, how much conflict they were having, or we could take a 24-hour urine sample from their kids and measure how many stress hormones, particularly adrenaline, was getting secreted in the children's bodies. So if you're fighting, your kids are secreting adrenaline. And if they're secreting adrenaline because they're stressed out, one of the things that happens to them is that the first and most sensitive system to reflect this stress is the attentional system. The kid's ability to focus attention, the kid's ability to shift attention when they want to, and the kid's ability to sustain attention. And part of what we're seeing in all of this diagnosis of hyperactivity is in part a reflection of increased family stress, increased stress between parents. So the attentional system is really a very sensitive indicator of whether kids are stressed out. So one thing I was very interested in was, is there anything we can do if there is an ailing relationship between parents to buffer kids from that?
Thank you. One of my favorite speakers on emotional intelligence, John Gottman. A wealth of knowledge there. And so that brings us smoothly into the power of cultural sensitivity. Why culture matters in parenting. Cultural sensitivity helps children feel seen, nurtures emotional intelligence, and opens them up to diversity. And so how we are responding to our children in our little everyday interactions, we're building, we know that we're building into them, and that is what parents do, you know? We build the bricks, the layers, and there is such a huge wall to build that at times some things can slip away. So just us bringing into awareness our own consciousness, into those every little interactions, just where we can, where there's a moment. There may have been a day that is quite intense and hectic, but even if there is a moment. So we ask ourselves, how have our cultural assumptions shaped the way that we support our children or our child? And what might we have overlooked? For the simple fact that it is just habits. Thinking about identity and belonging, for us growing up, my parents coming from West Africa, is that it was always this thing of a double life. Being one way at home, we spoke English at home, but the culture at home was different to school. And then coming home from school and having to slightly shed that skin in order to be able to, so there was this thing of fitting in, of identity and belonging. Yes, I have African heritage. At that time, I had never even visited where my parents were born, but I am, and I was British. All of my schooling, my friends, everything that we said, the way we spoke. And so there was this idea of identity, that I was identifying with this group, but at home. And so sometimes there was an overlap and sometimes there was a gap that I fell between. So the awareness of noticing one cultural norm that we take for granted and just questioning it. The unconscious continuum. And so from unconscious bias to cultural awareness, and following on again, just bringing into awareness and simply acknowledging is, by way, the route to change. Let's imagine, we're going to take a moment to use our imagination. We're always asking our children to do that. And so this scenario, one child shows excitement by speaking loud, using gestures, and in that culture, emotion and energy is valued. Another expresses their joy more quieter, because culturally for them, calmness is preferred. Both are expressing genuine emotions, but through a different cultural lens. So taking a few moments to, we always reflecting on ourselves. Have you ever been told that you are either too much or too quiet, just by being you, simply being yourself? And the idea being that, like in any situation, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. So even using that experience that we have had to then inform, okay, so that might be a feeling, an emotion that my child experiences, and see how looking at it from that perspective can help us to become more inclusive and more compassionate, or see things through a more inclusive and compassionate lens. And so when we find ourselves in those situations, as we've spoken before, where those biases come up, because they will and they do, and it is, as I said before, is something that we can only bring to conscious mind, but it is already there. And yes, there are so many other mediums that can influence, perpetuate, and stoke the fire of that. But ultimately, the question that we have to ask ourselves is this just something I'm unfamiliar with? There was a really sweet story that I discovered, and I think that we can always learn a lot from children. We are not on our own. They are definitely teaching us for sure. Our daily teachers giving and doling out lessons in how to be and how to care and how to parent. So there's a sweet story here where we learn from a young lady how to cross those lines, how to reach out even when we feel a little bit peppered. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this video.
Hi, my name is Miriam Alassar. This is my 4th year in Amana Academy School, and this is my first time to give a TED Talk. I will be talking about my idea how to unify the people of this world together, so we can all live peacefully and stop fighting over our differences and focus more on our similarities. It all started one day when I went to the park after school. I didn't have anyone to play with. And then this girl came. She was so quiet and shy. My mom saw her and said, "Why won't you go and talk to that girl? Then you can play together." I thought it was a good idea. Once I went to the girl, asking her if she would like to play with me. She looked at me with her eyes wide open. Suddenly, she seemed confused and stared at me like I was an alien. I stared at her back. Then she said with a foreign accent, "Why are you dressed that way? You look weird." I felt sad because she was judging me on what I was wearing. And so I said to her, "And why are you talking in a weird way?" to pay her back for what she said. The girl now seemed embarrassed of what I said, and I didn't want her to be sad. Maybe I wasn't supposed to pay her back that way. So I got an idea. I told the girl, I will tell you why I dress this way and tell you a little about myself. And in return, you will tell me why you talk differently and tell me a little about yourself too. Maybe after we understand each other, we could become friends instead of enemies. Then we can play together and have fun. I started explaining that wearing a head cover and long skirts is a dress code for my religion for girls, and I'm a Muslim child. The girl still looked puzzled. Then she said, "What's a Muslim child?" Right away, I had a splendid idea. I remembered the poem I always recited when I felt the need to explain myself to others. I read it in my favorite book, which was called Muslim Child when I was 5, and decided to use it in situations like this so it could become handy. I stood in front of the girl and told her, "Listen to this, and hopefully you will accept me as a good friend afterwards. Please, for all of you who want to know what a Muslim child is, allow me to share this with you as well. Muslim child, child of peace, child of war, from a far-off distant shore. What do your black eyes see? My eyes are not only black, sometimes they are blue as the sky, or green as a tropical sea, or brown as a trunk of a palm tree, and every shade in between. My skin can be black as molasses, or pink as a blush on a rose, as golden as freshly made honey, or dark copper brown as a penny, and every shade in between. I am the richest of rich, and the poorest of poor, as famous can be, a general's child pampered and bored, a soldier's child orphaned by war, and every rank in between. I come from many countries, speaking many languages, but in one set of belief, I believe in Noah, Jesus, Abraham, Muhammad, and Moses, and in God who sent them, and in every messenger in between. So the Muslim child, child of peace, what do your bright eyes see? I see that we're each a piece in the puzzle of humanity. I'll try to understand you if you try to understand me. Now back to my story. Guess what the girl did? She gave me the biggest smile ever and clapped for me and told me I would love to be your friend. Isn't that amazing how just a sincere couple of words full of knowledge can change the whole situation? I told the girl, now it's your turn to tell me about yourself. I have to understand you like you understand me now. The girl started to tell her story. I am from Mexico. We came here for a better chance of life. My dad is a farmer. He tries to support my family by moving from place to place, finding new jobs. We moved to this area last month, and I'm still trying to adjust on my new school. It's just so hard for me to improve my foreign accent that fast. I understand better than I speak, and I don't have a lot of friends to practice speaking with. Maybe if we become friends, you can help me, she said. I felt sad and asked her to forgive me for my ignorance when I made a comment about the way she speaks, and told the girl I would love to be her friend. Now let's go play. I had so much fun playing with her, and I gained a new friend. Please, now, for everyone listening to me, I hope you got the idea. We all have to start fighting ignorance with knowledge, stop picking on each other, overcome our differences. If each one of us start to pass a good book, or a nice coat, give a beautiful speech, or write an inspiring story, hopefully my generation can live in a more peaceful world. We all come from different cultures and backgrounds. The way I dress shouldn't matter how people view me in the world. Instead, we should all be judged by our actions and characters. Thank you for listening.
Indeed. Wow. I think that That was it in a nutshell, really. Taking that, all of that, what was said there by young Mariam, and so well said indeed, just by asking the question, being present and willing. Embracing neurodiversity and difference. Neurodiversity and inclusion. So we know that neurodiversity is, it feels like a new word, but the experience of neurodivergent people has been something that has been going on for a long time, and finally there is some acknowledgement for that. There's some understanding about that, and therefore there's also the need to include that as part of cultural sensitivity, viewing disability and special needs all as areas that we need to focus in terms of how we make those communities or those individuals feel included. So something that I'm sure we could all attest to being at once, hopefully, maybe, or probably for most people more than once, in a situation where either a child is crying or perhaps having a moment or a meltdown, and you can literally feel the space around you. Or at least when I spoke to a friend about this earlier, she said, it's not even that I think other people are going to be judging me or thinking ill of my child. She said, I just feel really anxious, so I'm always trying to contain my child's emotions or the way they express. She has a son who is neurodivergent, and she recently decided to get him a badge because she felt that there were certain spaces and environments that he would go into that he was not received well, because the bias would simply be, this is a poorly or bad behaved child. And actually he was just overstimulated in that space or that environment at that particular time. And when she said that she decided that it was time to have a badge, and she said since having this, it's something quite cute they made together. And she said that how then people in knowing respond to him has been different. But also she feels that, and he also feels like, why should I have a badge on? I feel perfectly normal. It's everyone else that needs to adjust, which in a lot of ways is perfectly correct indeed. So again, imagine your child processes sensory input is more intensely experienced. A well-meaning friend or relative, says, calm down, sit down. How do you intervene with that? And again, just taking a moment, even if that isn't your experience, how do we intervene with that? Can be a tricky one depending on who we're speaking to. I think the idea of coming from a place of curiosity opposed to correction, again, it is this thing of, for a lot of parent friends that I know, even for myself, of adjusting how we know to respond to something, and actually choosing to be curious rather than correct, to ask, how are you feeling? Maybe even, are you tired? Are you hungry? Are you excited? And sometimes just even naming it alone. And so that opposed to, let me just fix it, just stop. And I think the more that we have those kind of conversations with those who are close to us or around our children, then we're all learning. We're all on the same page. Okay. Here's a scenario that I think every single parent, if not already, could definitely relate to. And that is when your child comes home having perhaps overheard or had an experience that makes them feel reduced. So for example, They overhear a comment about their voice or accent, their body type, or their skin tone. You will notice that shift and that quietness in them, or that response, or it may even be a sharp or a loud response. It may be that they're closed off. In terms of what do we do in that moment, or pause to consider, what is our natural go-to? Do we begin the conversation there? What happened? What did they say? Do we get into that conversation then? Do we wait for a later moment? Or simply do we offer, comfort and presence and a listening ear? I think it depends on the relationship that you have with your child, the child in that moment. And sometimes it can be a tricky one to gauge. And a lot of the time we might go to those natural responses. So which response feels more natural to you, and would you go to based on your cultural background? Speaking for myself, I feel like it's always in the moment. It's like, let's have this, this is what has happened, let's have this conversation now. And perhaps, I definitely have learned that there are moments where you have to take a beat and let the conversation come to you. So, our cultural background and our experience shape that instinct, that how we respond. So sometimes having to just take a breath and hold back and maybe have that conversation at a different time, or have a different type of conversation. So, I'm sure a lot of parents do this as well, of, thinking, we hope to not be in a position or situation where we have to have this conversation with our children, but there is going to be that moment, and there usually already has been, at least before the age of 10. And so thinking about how we can use our own words, and maybe even some of the riches from our culture, maybe we borrow something from another culture in terms of a practice of being able to, fill them up again with their own value, and invite them to share their feelings in a way that feels really comfortable to them. The Ubuntu thread. I am because we are. I'm going to read it because I enjoy it so much. Ubuntu emphasizes interdependence, compassion, shared humanity. Ubuntu recognizes that every person's well-being is linked to the others. And it reminds us that parenting happens not in isolation, but within a web of community and care. Basically, as going back to, as I said, building your village. We are a village between ourselves and school. We are the village, our community, our wider community. And so just reflecting on how we have that practice of Ubuntu, maybe we don't call it that, in our own lives, in our own families, and in our community. So how can we teach our children to see themselves as part of something larger, so they care for others, as well as for themselves? And also something that, to be noted, is to allow themselves to be cared for by others, to have that trust. Excuse me. And so I invite you this month to practice some Ubuntu by reaching out, having, sharing a few words or a conversation, some deep listening. Perhaps you connect with another parent, or, you have a moment with your child's teacher, or just welcoming a tradition into your home, or a play date, something where there's a welcoming in of community, of other, of unity, of oneness, of the collective. And so our video here explains exactly what Ubuntu is.
There's this story from Ghana about, this young girl looking at his father who is peering into the past intensely. And the girl says, "Papa, you are always looking into the past. Why?" And the father looks at her and says, "My daughter, because the answers to the future always reside in the past." And that's where knowledges that are banished in the past, like Ubuntu, become relevant. The word Ubuntu comes from a Southern Nguni word or phrase that says, "I am because you are. You are because we are." In other words, as human beings, there's a sense in which there is some connection and interdependence. We rely on each other. Let me start by saying that Ubuntu is not a political program. I also want to add that it is not, a religious, expression. Ubuntu is about our social awareness, a consciousness of the others, a consciousness of the fact that we all have a responsibility to ourselves as human beings, especially the vulnerable among us. But perhaps more importantly, we also have a responsibility to, the world around us, the totality of our environment. Did you know that 30% of food crops in the world need cross-pollination from bees, these tiny insects? So if you are going to destroy the bees or the earth, you are ultimately destroying yourself. So the principle of co-agency implies that we are co-creators. It relies on the recognition that we are interdependent in a balanced biodiversity. So it is that principle of co-agency that Ubuntu encourages. The awareness that our interdependence, that personhood moves beyond the relationship between humans and humans, but a relationship between humans and non-humans, precisely because we are implicated in their lives and they are implicated in our lives. Even in the West, which thrives on the principle of individualism, there's a sense in which they agree that they're fundamental, basic human rights that each one of us owes to the community. I always like to make a distinction between individuality and individualism. Individuality gives you a sense of independence and freedom and also a development of your own personal character. Individualism, to the contrary, is self-referential. It is about you, me, all the times. And the ego always takes over. In all human societies, the way we temper the personal ego, communities moderate those by constantly reminding you that you are not living in isolation. You belong to a family, you belong to a broader community, you belong to a community of your peers, and you also belong to the world, and you have a responsibility for that world. If you get, too implicated in your subject, then you end up sounding like a missionary. I don't want to sound like a missionary. What Ubuntu has taught me, in a very profound way, is to realize that some of what we call banished knowledges or indigenous knowledge systems that we have here in Africa and in many other parts of the world, that there is value in some of these knowledges, and that perhaps if we want to reimagine the society of the future, then there's a sense in which a value system like Ubuntu can teach us, one, our mutuality, secondly, our conviviality as a people. Let me go back.
Thank you. And so, I'm a few slides forward. And so, again, the thread that binds these conversations together and the foundation that it's built on, the idea that we are a community, that we have a duty and care, a duty of care even, and responsibility to not just our child, but to all the children. You know, I always comment that, you know, they're all our children. And that is the idea that their wellness is important. Our children's friendship group are important to us because they are important to our children. So as we continue to build this community and our village by reflecting on our contribution, you know, what we want to bring that is of value, what we may want to leave behind, what we want to bring into consciousness and awareness, and what threads we want to give our children, so that is the thread that they take out there into the world. Okay, we have a few more minutes left now, so I am going to just I'm gonna visit the tools. We do have time for tools. So in terms of what you can take away today, one of the greatest reflections and reflective exercises is that pausing and naming, is being able to just catch yourself in a response and just check in. Is that out of discomfort? Is that out of judgment? Is that out of surprise because I'm I wasn't quite expecting that. It's not what I'm used to. So just by pausing and just naming it, and maybe just taking a different approach, or even just observing, so that we can see what needs to be brought to light, what needs to be set down, and what needs to be adjusted. 2, I would definitely say that we have, all of us within our homes, some really rich stories, rituals, languages, practices. Humor was really big in our house. There was, we are a family of fun making. And so that's something that even with my nephews and my nieces, that I can see that they've picked up some of that. It's a small thing, but it's a way of us bonding and being playful. Whether that thread is something that you really feel quite strongly about, that is or one of the threads that I in fact I invite you to find which thread within your own culture that you really, really appreciate, that you value. Strengthen that and allow that to be one of the threads that your child brings out into the world. And because ultimately that is what the world will experience through your child. And therefore, if we can also look at any new threads that we might want to bring in. I mean, we grew up as a family who ate around the table. Sometimes there might have been a parent missing if mum or dad was working. But as siblings, we always sat around the table. As I got older, that thinned out, and it doesn't. It only happens sometimes, mostly on special occasions. It's something that I absolutely love. So to create a space and a time every Friday of having, we're sitting around the table, playing, whatever game, whatever word game, but just having that time. That's again another simple micro exercise tool that you can bring in. So whatever speaks to you. So consider one cultural activity that you can bring into your home in the coming weeks and months, so that we are cultivating we're cultivating our village, and we're filling it with our culture, and as well as other cultures that are also around us. And so there's not much left for me to say except for this, which we already know: our views, our behavior, our values, are what our children learn from. That saying that children do as we do and not as we say. And I know that sometimes I'm like, oh, I've had a moment that's not quite what I'd like you to be saying, and I've become accustomed to having to explain myself at times. But I think ultimately, going back to what I said earlier, the hardest job on the planet, most definitely. And if we can bring awareness to ourselves and reflect on our nuances and where we are coming from, then we are going to ultimately, even in that action alone, we're going to teach our children how to pause and reflect, how to not move on judgment, how to soften and sometimes see, beyond that first layer, and then perhaps see who the individual is. And remembering what young Mariam said, which was just perfectly on point, if we just ask some questions and we're willing to invite what appears sometimes to be the unknown to us, that we'll find that we have so much more in common. As always, it is an absolute pleasure. Don't know where the time goes. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to being back again. Wishing you all a great evening, and thank you very much indeed. Ubuntu, let's build the village.